And it took some time before the first actual collaboration started. But before that we had spoken a lot about what the composer and what the musician are, what they have to do with each other, where they need each other and where they need to ignore each other.
I can't begin to count the number of times that I wish I could call on Mozart to ask him many questions about what he's written. And it is such an honor and a thrill for me to sit in the same room with a composer for whom I have great respect. I think that the most important thing that I learn from this experience is to try to get off of the page and into the world of the sounds themselves and the piece itself, and not just looking at black dots on the page. We forget sometimes that there was a human heart and a human voice, in a sense, speaking through the page to begin with. So to be able to talk to that person is a gift.
And work with composers with whom I cannot speak. I cannot call them up and ask that what on earth are you looking for in this passage. But I can use my experience with the different composers of today with whom I have been working with. I can use the experience that I gather from this in taking a score of, let's say, Brahms, Beethoven, Schumann, and imagine how they used the notation in a different way, and how much they left out from the score. How much was it a realization of an idea? And each composer has an own way of doing this. Therefore, it's a work of a magician in the sense that you have to create an impression of an interpretation of a work that doesn't necessarily exist in reality at all. It leaves a mark in the brain of the audience, but what they think they hear doesn't necessarily have to do with reality at all. And suddenly this noise is a beauty. It is not a sound that is destroyed, but it is a beautiful sound in itself. Although we had learned earlier as musicians in school that we must never make that kind of sound, but that was in context of totally other kind of music. And something that today sounds ugly can sound beautiful tomorrow, and we cannot really know that in advance. And something that in one piece that sounds ugly today, tomorrow when I play it for the fourth or the fifth time, it suddenly starts to have a beauty in itself. It has transformed into something else. And why this happens? It's because our conception of beauty is a very escaping idea. They are less interesting in the technical sense. Most often they will be writing something that is comfortable to perform for them. And they don't accidentally find new sounds. They look for new sounds that are comfortable to produce. Whereas a composer thinks purely in the sense of the sound or a new technique. Only afterwards comes the question that is this possible to perform, and is it possible to perform in a certain context? I find it's impossible to separate even one note that I play from my personality. That if I play one long note, open A string, according to strict instructions, pianissimo, no vibrato, it will still sound different. It will be an interpretation of that note by my person. And the more I try to be faithful to the composer and to the composer's ideas, the more I'm being faithful with the only way I can do it. and I'm interpreting while I'm trying to just follow instructions. Therefore, this is a very complicated process. It will always remain somehow metaphysical. We are some kind of alchemists, but at the same time I find that the more we have clear idea of the basic principles of what a musician does, the more we have freedom. And people are afraid, they think that if they go to a concert, that the main thing is that they must not be bored. So they must be stimulated all the time. Therefore, suddenly when I'm playing a Bach suite, I must compete with Star Wars, or I must compete with the three tenors playing in a park for 500,000 people. And this creates a very new situation for the musician of today, because I, as an interpreter, have to make every person in the audience somehow forget that life outside this moment exists, and forget that they must not be bored, because being bored can be a wonderful feeling also. All kinds of feelings can be wonderful if you just let them happen.
I guess the second thing that I learned from this experience is that I can take that attitude and that style of working to older music that I'm working on, to try to find a new approach, a fresh approach.
So if I take a Bach suite, it's again possible that I get a little bit closer to him by trying to use the kind of cello that he would have heard those days. But then what could I bring to Kaija's music from the cello of Bach's time? With the Baroque cello, we use different kind of strings, a different kind of bow, and there are a whole number of things that are different in the noise, in the overtones, in the harmonics, in the way you start a note. And all these aspects of cello playing are aspects that interest Kaija in today's cello. And with my experience in finding sounds that might interest her in another kind of cello, I can start looking for them in the modern cello, and maybe change the string and use a gut string instead of a metal string, and we realize that we find exactly the sound she was looking for. So therefore this is a constant two-way thing, that looking backwards or looking into the future. So if I take a Bach suite, and also we had gone through some string instrument techniques that I had, that she had invented, and then we saw how they worked on the cello and where we might find a more practical solution to achieve a certain effect. But I have to say that I'm not the inventor of the ideas that she would use, but I'm rather, as a musician, I'm the person to try out the ideas maybe before they go into her pieces.
I think it must be scary for a composer to pass on his or her music, not knowing what will happen to it in the hands of somebody like me. But I love the fact that the slate is clean and I can start from scratch with what I feel strongest about.
When the composer comes with some ideas on paper or ideas in his or her mind, and ask the instrumentalist to try them out. So if there's a passage that is not instantly playable, the interpreter can make a very bad harm by saying that this is impossible. And many composers have suffered from this because they don't have a personal relationship, trusting relationship with instrumentalists. So they have given some ideas that may have been excellent ideas but needed some developing. But they have simply got a flat answer from the interpreter saying that this is impossible, this cannot be done, it's a bad idea. And therefore they have abandoned probably a whole new world that could have been developed of that. when the composer comes with some idea.
I also find that Kaija's rhythmic gestures come naturally to me. I feel that I understand what she's after. Rhythmically, I don't know if it's something personal or something that actually has to do with the human voice, but it's not something that works against my inner rhythm.
We must try and understand more than is humanly possible to understand somebody else's mind. Therefore, the kind of personal relationship that I have developed with Kaija is a very important thing that I try to have with all the composers with whom I work. It is very difficult for the interpreter, for me to put myself in the world of a composer, because the world of each composer is completely different. And they may be looking for things that have nothing to do with each other, but they are looking for them through my cello. So I have the tremendous responsibility when I try out the ideas, not to say that an idea is bad if it sounds bad, but to try to understand what the composer is looking for and why it sounds bad, and could there possibly be a way to make that sound good. Freedom. We must define what we want with freedom. With freedom we want a feeling. We want to fool ourselves to be free. Therefore all these physical obstructions that I have to play a note that's very far and I have actually no time to go there. Now this is a very interesting situation. I have to somehow fool myself and make myself forget the physical impossibility of playing that note in time. And at the same time I have to find a way to fool the listener and make him or her forget that I actually spent more time than I was supposed to, but to give the impression that I did it much faster than it is physically possible. Now, it's all these limits that give us the freedom. I find that it's often the times in history where there have been most rules that we have had the most interesting music at the same time. And it's somehow not the fact that these people had to write according to a certain set of rules. That would have limited them. It's on the contrary, they had to find more and more ways to go around those rules. And somehow imagination is something that works very well. It's easier to think how to avoid something, how to be more clever than somebody else in going around a certain rule or limitation, than taking out all obstacles and being completely free. Now, we of course have to interpret the music that is written on the page, but again, with that faithfulness we create ourselves a certain structure within which we can be free. And then we have to use our own imagination to go further and to use this as a starting point and make every decision that we make sound like a free choice and inspiration and improvisation instead of interpreting an instruction. And therefore I put myself in opposition with many other musicians who say that we must not take too much into account what the composer writes on the page, that we must let our own imagination flow freely. I think freedom needs those limitations, and the composers need us to be very conscious of them.
There have always been many, many languages, and the 20th century more and more and more. And that used to change every 50 years or so, and now it's changing every week. Before, if you got a Mozart score and you were living in the classical time, you knew certain things about interpreting those quarter notes and those measures. You knew that there was an emphasis on the first and third beat of a 4/4 time. measure. These things that the Mozart didn't have to write in his score. Pay particular attention to emphasize the 1 and the 3, because sometimes I do it differently, and then the audience should be prepared. These are things that we as a 20th century performer have to go back and remember that in Mozart's time we didn't have bel canto singing in the Wagnerian style, and that to apply those to Mozart would be as missing the point as applying Stockhausen to Saariaho. So yeah, looking at the score, it's a new thing. That's difficult to talk about, but what I'm striving for is sort of to capture this it, we call it the it of music. What is it about music, or what is it about art? You could say it's this it. And it's the same thing when you're listening to Laconisme, you go, oh, that was magic. You said that was magic. You're transported to another world, this world of the music or the film or the art, and you're not stopping to go, oh, well, they have really good technique. Oh, this is using multiphonics. All these technical things should disappear in service of this idea, this it. And it has to do with putting yourself in the state where you can remove yourself and the techniques from the music, that you just do it and it becomes a third thing. This it is the hardest thing to talk about, What is it about Kaija? If I don't like his music, well, why don't I write my own? And if you look at history, it's starting more and more. And I think that that's also very interesting, because performers have a special relationship to their instrument. And if they write down some of their experiments in noodling and composition, I think it also enriches the whole repertoire. It's composition from a different standpoint.
I generally try not to pick up music to perform that doesn't touch me somehow, that I feel I have no connection to, because I assume I won't be able to present it in a satisfactory way or a believable way that will touch other people. So I often ask myself, what are the most important aspects of a piece that must work for me when I'm picking up a brand new piece or working with a composer with whom I'm less knowledgeable about?
Schubert. I want to play Schubert. I want to play Bach too. I mean, there are these, I can't be quite so clear on that. So that's why I don't want to say, okay, I only play those pieces that I'm comfortable with. And my definition of comfort changes also. Comfort. Where I am in space. And at one time I just wanted to do power pieces that are just really energy. So that's where I think that the person has a role. But still, it's because when it's right, when I'm in the mood, then you're going to be able to reach that other thing. In ideal cases, we don't live in an ideal world, and sometimes we have to earn a living, and we play a piece that we're not in the mood to. And that's okay too, because it will go in spite of us. If one's fortunate enough to be able to call up the composer and say, hey, what do you mean by this? That's great. One also has today the advantage of recordings and videos and documents. And that's important to start traditions now, because there's just too much to just assume that you know a language. And I think that's the first responsibility of the interpreter, to look at the score and say, with whom am I dealing? What's her language? Where do I start? Where is this composer coming from? That was my initial problem with Laconisme, because I was trying to interpret Laconisme like in Freundschaft of Stockhausen. That doesn't work. This it definitely, it has the feeling that it also comes from the outside. Having done your part, that there's something else that comes back and informs your next performance or your next project. This is a cliche that's been done more and more. But the energy of the audience, for lack of a better, more scientific word, that also plays a role in creating what's happening. In the gallery, for example, I felt like the music came from somewhere. Of course, it's somewhere in the experiences, and you're translating what you hear. But it would have been different if I had been alone in an empty gallery. There were all these people absolutely quietly listening, which also fed the process.
This second piece of Kaija's that I'm now working on, Lone, is for soprano and electronics. This is my first experience with electronic sounds. I must say it's quite a challenge. I think it's really another world for me. First of all, I suppose it is just an unknown in a sense, and that perhaps when I've become more familiar with the sounds, I'll feel like I'm making music with strings or with an oboe in the sense that I understand that sound. But all of these sounds that at least Kaija has put together are quite foreign to me. I need to find my path in terms of matching the sound sometimes, or singing with the sound or singing against the sound, depending on what I think the intentions are at that particular moment of the piece.
She basically had to give me an introduction to her language. It's just the experience I had when learning German or learning French. She sort of encouraged me to hear the idea by using words, and then I would try to translate it with my flute, and then find out whether this is what she wanted or not. But I think it didn't take very long before I sort of had an idea, because the piece is very strong when you can even play it incorrectly, so to speak. If you even try to play it very exactly, you still start getting the character of the piece. The language is strong enough that if you keep repeating it, you're bound to get some kind of idea of it. It's the same thing with Bach. Bach can be played so-called poorly by students or by less competent musicians, but the compositional construction is so strong that you still recognize it as Bach.
So nothing is written in stone. I think of my work in that way all the time in terms of my own performance, but what's always interesting is the possibility of even changing pitches or changing the ensemble to an extent. So I like the fact that Kaija and I work in such a way that we're not thinking about a final perfect product, but that it's a work in progress.
It's somehow that it gets beyond the specific techniques and beyond the personality of the performer or of the composer. You know, she's not trying to say, this is Kaija Saariaho. She's trying to say, this is an idea. This is a place we can visit. And so this is not about Camilla playing Kaija. This is about what happens when one hears laconisme. And all these little things are to serve that experience. Your primary role is, in fact, to interpret the composer. You have to be true to the composer, but having done that and having done your homework as far as you can and do it exactly and follow the metronome, then I wouldn't worry what happens about your personal interpretation. So I think you have a responsibility as a performer to obey that. If you don't like it, then write your own piece. And Debussy should sound like Debussy, Saariaho should sound like Saariaho. In fact, I think she gave me the score of Laconisme in Darmstadt, and it lay around in my music room for a long time because I was working on Stockhausen pretty intensively, and this was such a different language than Stockhausen's for me. I was first kind of skeptical. And she wasn't being clear. Stockhausen was very clear. Every quarter note has to be four 16th notes, and I'd ask Kaija about how long should this trill be. She says, as long as you feel like. And this was for me, does this composer not know what she's doing? I mean, she should, if you're a real composer, you should have exactly in your head what's going on. So this was first for me, coming out of my Stockhausen phase, so to speak. I had to re-enter into the possibilities of another musical language.
No traditions to follow when I'm working on a new piece. I'm working with a clean slate, and I suppose in a sense one could think that that's kind of scary because you have nothing to fall back on. You don't have a coach around to tell you, back when so-and-so sang this piece, the tradition was to sing this kind of portamento, etc., etc. But the piece becomes more an expression of myself in a sense, and I don't mean to take it away from the composer, but I think that for any performer, the closer one can get to an honest truthful and even vulnerable presentation, the more likely that one will learn about oneself and also be able to share something of depth and importance to an audience.
I end up having an extremely personal relationship with the music I play. And I found over the years that that limits me in one way, that there are certain pieces that I don't feel comfortable in playing. I've played a lot of things that I don't ultimately really like for whatever reason. But I also found if I have a need to play music with which I very strongly personally identify, where I feel like I can, my particular person is a suitable transmitter of this music, I either have to find scores that I feel comfortable with and feel like I can play them truly, or I can also write my own music. My role as a performer in this case is supporting her ideas, is allowing her the freedom to write what she imagines would sound nice, whether it's physically possible on the flute or not. And if it's not physically possible by traditional techniques, i.e. ones that I've already learned, then I have to find another way to solve the problem. And through that process, her music expands because she's not limited by a performer who says, well, I can't do that, I've never done that before. And I'm not limited as a performer by saying, please only write this. Because of her daring also to write things that might not work, then I've got the possibility of increasing the language, increasing my vocabulary of my flute language.
It seems that the pieces that we've done together so far have fit not only my voice but my nature well and my personality well. But she, of course, would have even greater opportunities and prospects with a completely different voice type than my own. Aha! Unexpected.
I don't think it's the point, and I think Saariaho is as serious as she can talk about her aesthetics or her music. There's also an element of fun. She's having fun taking these to the extreme, and I'm having fun being able to go and it's music, and we're just humans making music after all, so let's keep it in perspective. The composers today are trying to use the score as a combination of showing what they want as well as showing us how to get it. I mean, this is another potential problem. Is the score meant to show how it's supposed to sound, or is the score supposed to be a performance score that is the easiest thing for me to interpret? When I was doing Laconisme, I did most of my scores, for example, the Stockhausens, demanded to do by memory. And I noticed that you communicate much more effectively if you've internalized the score and you just sing it. I mean, imagine Michael Jackson being bound to a music stand, or any of these pop stars of today. Of course, you don't use a music stand. So of course I set out to memorize Laconisme. But I found that I actually missed the score in this case. I have the piece from memory. But I still prefer to read the score because even with the new printed edition, they've tried to keep as much of her handwriting flair as possible. And I found that I was just inspired by the way that she placed the notes on the stage, the wave of her lines. It also helps me, know her language. This is maybe a purely subjective thing, but I'm also very susceptible to visual impulses. If we make something that finally inspires us to think of, to have time and space stand still, that's nice, and that's sort of what our goal is. But I think it shouldn't be so concentrated that we forget the other aspects of it. And then we can also smell the flowers, sentir la rose along the way.